is a lively crowd, and you're settled down quite fast. This is wonderful. I love it. I love it. I'd like to welcome you all here this evening. My name is Mary McElhaney. I have the honor of being the chair of the board of the Maine Irish Heritage Center. I'd like to refer to this as the gathering of the clans. You know, the Irish, we're all over Maine, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful celebration that we have. This is the 8th year that we've done this. I'd like to recognize Gerard P. Conley Sr. He was the Jerry was the second recipient. There he is. And he and his family have attended every one of these, except for the year that he got a new puppy and wanted to stay home with the dog. We have a very, very special guest this evening, and I'm going to introduce her first because she's come quite a ways, and she has to go back tonight, and that is Finola Quinlan. Finola is the Consul General of Ireland, representing New England. She's only been in New England, or in Boston, for about 7 weeks, and we are very honored that she is here today with us, and very honored that this is her first trip outside of Boston. So, Ms. Quinlan.
Thanks, Mary. And I'd just like to start by saying welcome, everybody, and thank you all very much for the very warm welcome that you've given me here this evening. It's been really a great pleasure to chat to so many of you, and before I came, I was doing a little bit of reading about Maine, and I read that 150,000 Irish people currently living in Maine trace their roots back to Ireland. And I think, quite a lot of you have managed to gather in this room tonight. So it's wonderful. It's wonderful to meet so many of you and to meet I've met people from Galway and from Cork and from Sligo and Connemara, and it's great to see that good, healthy rivalry still exists in generations, many generations on. So I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you very much for inviting me to be here this evening. It's absolutely my pleasure, and as Mary mentioned, it is my first trip outside of Massachusetts. So it's been a really good trip. You say I've come a long way, but any of you who know John Foley, who very kindly drove me here this evening, will know that he chatted all the way up in the car, so it went like that. It did not feel like 2.5 hours at all. So just to say, this evening, obviously, I had also the great pleasure of presenting a cheque to the Maine Irish Heritage Centre from the Irish Government. It comes through our Emigrant support programme. And that's a programme the department has been running for the last 10 to 12 years, basically, to support emigrant organisations all around the world. Now, primarily it's in the UK and in the US, although more and more we're providing funding to Australia and Canada and other areas where Irish people have set up as well. And one of the main reasons, a lot of the funding goes towards organisations that provide welfare services to vulnerable Irish people, or perhaps to help provide immigration services for undocumented and so forth. But it's also designed to encourage people to maintain and to cherish Irish culture and to ensure that Irish culture thrives. And obviously that's very much what the Maine Irish Heritage Centre does. And I know that the main two missions of the centre are documenting the Irish past of people of Maine, and of course ensuring that Irish culture stays strong in Maine and thrives and flourishes. And I had the pleasure earlier of looking at the library and the genealogical centre, and I could see that there's a lot of really positive and good work going on there. So the cheque that the Irish government provided this evening is a really, it's in recognition of that good work, and it's in support of that good work. And I'm really pleased that what it's going to do is support the organisation to hire an executive director. So it's kind of incredible, actually, that this... I think it's a real tribute to the volunteers who've run this organisation for as long as you have, that you've managed to do it. You've done it through sheer dint of hard work and goodwill and through, your own time and perseverance. I've met, obviously, quite a few of you here this evening, and I've read that many of you are super volunteers, and I think that's a very, very good description. But having said that also, if of course, that the centre wants to thrive and continue to grow, and I think it's great that you're going to be able to now have an executive director that will, assist you in that and help you to not only maintain this particular centre, but also reach out to other Irish organisations around Maine and draw them in, which I think is very important, that it's very open and inclusive. And also, of course, one of the other objectives, I think, is to set up an internet site or portal where all of the information can be collated together, and people will be, everybody will know what's going on, and organisations can share information. But of course, one of the main events of this evening is also to recognise Jim Wellehan and all the good work that he has done over many years in Maine. Jim, I know, is going to receive the 8th annual Claddagh Award a little later. So I only had the pleasure of meeting Jim this evening, but I did read up a bit about all the work you've done over many years with the homeless. And as someone who's travelled an awful lot in Africa, I was really interested to read that you had spent a year teaching in Lesotho. I had the pleasure of visiting Lesotho a number of times as well, so I'm sure that must have been a very interesting period in your life. And also, of course, I know as a business leader in this area, you've had a very strong role in terms of advocating for working men and women, and I know that that's something that people want to honour and really recognise here this evening. So I just want to finish off by saying, really, I'm thrilled to have come. I'm thrilled to be able to be the person who's sharing the Irish Government's support of the work that you all do, and the support, of course, that those of you who aren't directly involved are demonstrating by being here this evening. And most of all, I want to say a really warm congratulations to Jim and your family, and wish you you were telling me earlier about your plans for retirement and travelling to Ireland and travelling more broadly, so I wish you every happiness and good luck and success with that. So thank you all very much. I wish you a very happy evening and a very lovely dinner. Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, you're going to do it. Fantastic.
This evening I'd like to first thank our wonderful sponsors. Our gold sponsors, Daniel Wellehan. Where's Mr. Wellehan? Thank you. And Mark and Roberta Hutchins. And those of you who have been to events here before will notice that you're sitting much more comfortably tonight. And that is because Mark issued a challenge to us last year to get chairs. So thank you, Mark and Roberta. Our friends at St. Joseph's College, we have a wonderful partnership with them. We thank them for their sponsorship. There they are. Thank you. And for their educational partnership. We have interns who will be starting here. We had an intern here last summer from St. Joseph's College. And we have interns who will be starting in January. Are some of you guys here? Great. And these interns will be working on one of our projects here, which is the archive. We're building the archives of Governor Joseph Brennan. And Nancy Brenneman has been heading up this effort for several years. And she has done an amazing job of getting the material together, building a team. A couple of the young videographers are here this evening, Sean and Candy. And we're going to even be doing more than this because we just received a wonderful gift from David Flanagan. Where's David? Thank you, David. A very substantial gift from David that will allow us to continue to film and to build this archives. And in June, we're going to be having a grand opening. So there's lots of wonderful things happening here. Our Claddagh Pipe Band has been invited to Galway to march in the parade. I think they're here. Mike Delahanty and his hurling team won the regional championship this year. A team from the Maine Irish Heritage Centre presented at the Dublin Genealogical Society recently. And our own Margaret Craven and Governor Brennan were recognized on the cover of a magazine in Galway and Carna about famous and very important people from that part of the world who are now in America. And there were 6 people, and Margaret was among them. Thank you, Margaret. Our longtime sponsors, Cloutier, Connolly, and Duffett. Thank you, guys. And Ed Kane and Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. There's Eddie. And Central Maine Power. And Patricia McDonough-Dunn. United Insurance. And WEX, where's Jason? Up there. And Bill and Peg Ryan, who are in Florida tonight. And I have to tell you, the suppliers and vendors of Lamey-Wellehan, you must be one of the most wonderful, loved people in the world, Jim, or else they fear you. We have for host Atrex and Dansko, and if you look at your wonderful program book, you will see many, many congratulations to Jim. We also have Conroy Tully Crawford, Cross Insurance, Michelle Locker and Vinnie O'Malley, TD Bank, and Robert Martino and Maxine Sklar. Thank you all, and thank you everyone who has made this night possible. I will soon invite Margaret Craven to come and give the blessing. After the blessing, our wonderful caterers at SOPO will guide you to the feast. After we eat and visit and talk, we will have a short video, and then we'll have a few speakers, and we'll have the award presentations. So sit back and enjoy. Margaret.
Thank you, Mary. It's always such a pleasure to be here, and welcome everybody. I noticed that we have some priests and some nuns here tonight, but I was invited to say the blessing because that I am able to recite it in Irish language. So that's the reason. Nadam neher is a vik is a spirit neve, amen. Banach tegus mure chulagan in chonacht. Or neher tarnjav gni vertainem gutjag recht gniunta de hillen tala martinter nav. Torgon yinjuv or on leher is ma mecha ma wahuicha vichni hen et nish agus gudiva, amen. 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 Just because nobody understood what I said, I'm going to recite a blessing by John O'Donoghue, who was a neighbor from Connemara. He was a Catholic priest. Unfortunately, he had an untimely death, but he was a fabulous poet and writer, and he just wrote the most wonderful prayers. Bannacht lay Jim Wellehan by John O'Donoghue. On the day when the weight deadens on your shoulders and you stumble, may the clay dance to balance you. And when your eyes freeze behind the gray window and the ghost of loss gets into you, may a flock of colors, indigo, red, green, and azure blue, come to awaken in you a meadow of delight. When the canvas frays in the currach of thought, a strain of ocean blackness beneath you, may there come across the waters a path of yellow moonlight to bring you safely home. May the nourishment of the earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. May the fluency of the ocean be yours. May the protection of our ancestors be yours. And so may a slow wind work these words of love around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Craven. You just wait for a few seconds, and the SOPO staff will direct you to your food. Thank you. You know, this is a wonderful, wonderful building, and there's a lot of events going on here. And there's one group that I would like to thank, because if it weren't for them and the Friends of St. Dom's and Learning Works, we would not have this building. And that is the Irish American Club of Maine, our founding partner. I want to thank them. We share this space along with the hurlers and dance groups and music groups. And speaking of music, next Saturday night, we have Schooner Fair here. Jack McCormick has tickets. Sam Kelly has tickets. You can take posters and you can take tickets on your way out. Tomorrow we have a holiday fair here. It's called the State Street Stroll. We'll have 30 vendors here. So we're going to be cleaning up rather quickly tonight. In fact, we're probably not even going to bother to wash the floor. And on December 12th, the Irish American Club is hosting all of us for our wonderful Christmas party. And we have Kaylee dance lessons here and Irish lessons here. So I just wanted to put in a plug for some of the wonderful things that we have here. And they're all free. And they're all great things for people from 1 to 100. So come on over. Dan, how are we doing?
Good.
Okay. And a big hand to Dan Mahoney, who makes this whole thing work, please. And Josh Swan, and Eric, and Sopo Catering. So we will begin the evening, and dessert and coffee will be delivered to your tables, and we will start with a video. After the video, we will have 4 speakers. The 4 speakers are Bob Clifford, who I know has some wonderful stories about Jim. Talk about their lifelong friendship. Margaret Craven, who is his friend from Lewiston, and they've done a lot of good things together. Margaret will talk. And then his brother-in-law, Tom Delahanty, and then his nephew, Mike Delahanty. Then we will have the guest of honor make his remarks. And then we will have the award presentation, and that will be by a surprise group of people. So, Dan, if you're ready, we'll start the video. Okay? Thank you all.
James Francis Xavier Wellehan was born in Lewiston, Maine in 1938. His grandparents are emigrating from County Sligo and County Kerry. Jim grew up in Lewiston after World War II and described it as a rather idyllic upbringing.
I grew up in the 40s and the 50s, and we just come through the Depression, and we just come through World War II. And moms didn't have to worry too bad about their kids. It was a wonderful environment to grow up in. My friends were mostly French-Canadian.
After graduating from Holy Cross, Jim left to teach in Lesotho, a small country located in southern Africa.
You know, actually I had 2 grandparents, 2 grandfathers. One was from Tubacari in Sligo. The other was from Dingle in Kerry. One in Ireland had to leave when he was 8 years old, go to work 8 hours a day and 10 hours a day, 6 days a week in a textile mill in England, and finally wound up working in Worcester, Mass, the American Steel and Textile Mill. No, Irish need apply signs were all over. We worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, 1 week days, 1 week nights. I was just looking at some old information, by the way. He seems to have been a fireman some of the time too, which I hadn't known. And he worked at the textile mill. When he got out of the mill, they sent him to get a technical degree because they thought he was bright enough to do it. And he would get out of work, and his wife would have a lunch pail for him to take, and when he'd buy on the trolley, she'd hand him the lunch pail, and he'd take it and go off to work. Dad, young single guy, and then he had pneumonia actually one late spring, and he was told to go down and spend the summer at Old Orchard. Those were the days, weren't they? He went down with his father, and his father saw my mum play the piano, thought she was kind of cute and very good, and he said, "Dan, why don't you ask her out?" By the end of the summer, they had been engaged, and that winter they were married. Dad had started the store because he and Charlie Lamey, who was the shoe department guy, got to be good friends and decided to start their own store. And Charlie Lamey wound up marrying my dad's sister, who used to teach in a Lewiston school. And they lived on Howe Street, and Dad lived upstairs, and Charlie and my aunt lived downstairs. And one day Dad went down to church. I walked down to church from Howe Street, and when he got there, he said, "Dan, you better go home. Charlie's been taken ill." So we went home. When Charlie got home, Charlie was dead, died of a heart attack, a sudden heart attack in his 30s. So my aunt was without a husband from that time on. Dad opened the store on St. Patrick's Day. It was one of those things. He and Charlie had worked at Peck's department store, and they were all their friends were Irish. It was an Irish town at that time because we were very good Catholics, and we didn't read too early and too much. A wonderful community event, and somehow or other the thing worked out, and from 1914 on went fine. I grew up in Lewiston and did marry a girl from Auburn, and she led me astray. We wound up moving across the river into Auburn. She walked into the shoe store to buy some shoes, and she was in with Sister Ruth. When I got out to say hello to Ruth when she came in, and said hello to Kath, and we got talking. I asked her out. A month after the first date, we were engaged, and 2 months after we were engaged, we got married. And that was December 31st, 1966, and here we still are. I was very lucky, and she was very patient. We're very lucky. We've got a nice group of people who enjoy what they do. They like each other. They work well together. It's a very collegial environment, and that's what you want. I mean, honestly, I don't go to work in the morning. I go to have fun, and most of the people in the company do. They enjoy what they do. It isn't going to work. It isn't like, oh, another 3 hours, it'll be over. You don't want that. That's not the way I want to work, and that's not the way I want to work with people. We've tried to pay people well, show them respect, and at this point in time, nobody hasn't been in the company for the last couple of years ever made less than $12 an hour if you go to high school, whatever you're doing. Now, $12 an hour is not a lot of money if you're trying to live. And $15 an hour is not a lot of money if you're a young mom and trying to raise a kid or two and you're on your own. It's almost impossible. I think we've got to look and see what we can do about making it as good a deal as we can. But when corporations say, we can't afford to raise the minimum wage, but we can afford to pay our CEO exorbitantly, give him all kinds of perks and benefits, there's something wrong with our thought process. Now, you can't raise the minimum wage without lowering the maximum wage. And I think we've got to look at top to bottom pay ratios and say, what's fair? We can change it, and we need to change it. And we need to treat people decently and kindly and be concerned about them. We look at the global warming thing, we have got to make a change, and I believe it's very feasible to do that. We've worked very hard to cut our carbon emissions. We've cut our carbon emissions by 40% since 2003. The interesting thing in all the issues we've taken to cut our carbon emissions, we have reduced our costs dramatically the whole time. If we don't do this, we are so toast. I mean, I look at what's happened in this state. I look at ocean acidification, which is caused by the increase in carbon in the ocean. We've tried to take a lead in that. We've run an energy fair here in Auburn every year. Solar roofs to air exchanges, there's so much we can do. When people can come and learn how to do things, they like it. And as I look at solutions for it, I look at the amount of money we spend in our military around the world. I look at the amount of money that is spent in military by other countries around the world. And if we get together as a group and said, what is our biggest threat? What's the biggest threat to the good people of this country? We'd say it's global warming. We'd say, maybe let's take half of our military budget and spend it on renewable energy and find new ways to do things and work together and help each other and cooperate. If we could do that sort of thing, we can make this a world that survives. If we don't do that sort of thing, we're all in terrible trouble. We'll turn it over to ESOP and they will own the company and they'll pay me back over a series of years and that'll work out just fine because they have a culture which is good. If you maintain a consistency of culture and concern for community, you'll do fine. Somalis have moved in, great need, and they're good people, and they're doing very well in school. We're so proud of the people of Lewiston. They came together so well to support the Somalis, to do everything they could to make them feel welcome. Because when we leave someplace, you leave it in terror. You leave a place which you have loved, and then awful things started to happen. And when you do that, you need a hand. You don't need a wall. You need someone who can reach out and be kind to you. And you know what? When you have a chance to reach out and be kind to somebody, two people benefit. The person to whom you are kind, but it makes you feel so good when you get a chance to be kind. So being kind is a very selfish thing to do. So I advise everyone out there, be kind every chance you get.
Good evening. My name's Bob Clifford. I'm a lifelong friend of Jim Wellehan, and really honored to be asked to make a few remarks. This is a great award, and it's an Irish award, and it has an Irish beginning, as you've seen some indications on the on the video. Both sides of the Wellehan family have their roots in Ireland. His mother, Kathleen, her name was McGuinn. Her family came from Sligo, as the video indicated. And his maternal grandfather was also named James, James McGuinn. He came to Worcester from New York, where he immigrated to. And Kathleen, his mother, had two brothers who became Jesuit priests, and one of whom started the Boston College School of Social Work. Jim's father's people, also from Kerry, where my people came from, at about the same time, the 1870s, 1880s, came to Lewiston from Holyoke, Mass, to work on constructing railroads. His paternal grandfather, also named James Wellehan, married a Kavanaugh and lived in an Irish neighborhood which was known as the Gas Patch. It was a famous Irish neighborhood in Lewiston. He was employed at the bleachery, and he was a very innovative and inventive man, and he claims that he was really the inventor of floating soap, but was edged out just by a hair by the Ivory Soap Company, which took all the credit. Now, Jim's father, Daniel Wellehan, he served in the Navy during the First World War, and he barely survived the great influenza epidemic which occurred near the end of that war. He had previously left high school to work at the B. Peck department store, and as the video indicates, he, in 1914, along with his brother-in-law, Charles Lamey, he opened the first Lamey-Wellehan shoe store, which was in downtown Lewiston. Now, the award celebrates our Irish heritage and those who have contributed to it. And it's really a great opportunity to celebrate a success story about a successful business and the person who runs that business, who happens to come from a proud Irish heritage. We recognize Jim Wellehan tonight, And as the video indicated, his formal name is James F.X. Wellehan, and he's really one of Maine's real treasures. And of course, the creation of the family business followed not too long after the immigration of those families from Ireland to America. And the business, as the video indicated, remains very much aware of its Irish heritage. And every March 17, it celebrates its anniversary, and the company celebrated its 100th anniversary on March 17 in 2014. The business grew and prospered. Daniel Wellehan was a very good businessman. He had Lamey-Wellehan retail shoes, and he also began a shoe manufacturing business, Sebago Mark, which Jim's brother Dan ran for many years. Now, before Jim Wellehan got into the shoe business, and before he attained his master's degree from the Wharton School of Business, he had some experience in the painting business. He and I spent a summer when we were in college painting houses. And one of the houses we painted was the Wellehan Cottage in Pine Point. So you could see how we got that business. I thought we did a pretty good job in painting that house. I was kind of proud of what we did. But it wasn't very long afterwards that I drove by the house, and Mr. Wellehan was having aluminum siding put on the house. So I guess that says something about the job we did, and some people referred to us as the Botch Brothers, B-O-T-C-H. Now, there's one story I want to tell. The Wellehans were always known for being very late to events, never on time. And it reminds me of that's true of both Jim and Dan and of their parents as well. And it reminds me of a story of a man in Ireland whose name was Timothy, who was a very nice man. He had 8 children. He struggled in life. And he also had the problem of being late. And his job began to be in jeopardy because he was constantly late. And his employer finally was very fed up, and he said, Tim, there's a meeting of the company tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, and you have to be there, and you have to be on time. And if you're not, you're gone. The job is gone. So Tim, as usual, didn't get up very early, and he was going to this meeting in Dublin, and he was driving his car, and he couldn't find a parking place. And he was getting very nervous because it was 10 minutes of 9, and he kept driving around the building, and he began to invoke the Lord to help him find a parking place. And he kept coming around, and there was no parking places, and he said, Lord, if I can find a parking place, I will go to Mass every Sunday. And he kept going around. He said, Lord, if I find a parking place, I will go to Mass 3 times a week. And still no parking place. 6 minutes of 9. The meeting starts at 9. He travels around again, and there's no places available. He is really beginning to panic. He had a lot of children. He needs this job. He said, Lord, he said, if you find me a parking place, I will go to Mass every day of the week. 3 minutes of 9. He said, Lord, if you find me a parking place, I will give up drinking. And so at 2 minutes of 9, he comes around to the building, and there, right in front of the building, was a beautiful open parking space. And as he's driving in, he says, never mind, Lord, I found one myself. In the 1970s, Jim took over the Lamey-Wellehan business, and he built on the early success of his father and the family. And under his leadership, the business expanded and grew. And today, it is one of Maine's very best and progressive businesses. It has retail locations in Auburn, Scarborough, Augusta, Topsom, and Bangor. Falmouth and Bangor. It is a business known for high quality and good value, as well as an outstanding service to its customers. It is also known as the business as a real leader and generous in the way it treats its employees, and it is considered one of Maine's very best employers. One of the most important aspects of the story about the business and about Jim is that he has adapted Lamey-Wellehan to changing times, and he's led the business to continued growth and success. And to the benefit of the state of Maine, he has resisted the trend, and I'm sure that at times the temptation, to sell the business to larger out-of-state ownership. And as we all know, out-of-state ownership often means out-of-touch ownership, disconnected from the community. And Jim has seen to it that the Lamey-Wellehan remains a Maine business and very much connected to the Maine community. And Jim is the center of the story of Lamey-Wellehan. He's a special person. He's an excellent business leader, the CEO of one of Maine's better businesses, and he's very generous and remains a leader and continues to play an active role in the affairs of his local community and in the state of Maine. He's also one of the most prominent leaders in protecting our environment, and Lamey-Wellehan, the company, has been at the forefront of energy savings and efficiency. At its business locations, it has taken advantage of every energy-saving construction, lighting, insulation, heating, and cooling, and has saved the company a lot of money as well. He has written extensively on energy and the environment and is known statewide and beyond as a leader in these areas. He's also an excellent family man, a loving husband to Kathy, who's half Irish, who over the years has been Jim's great helpmate in running the business. Jim's a wonderful father to his sons, Jim, John, and Dan. He's always been involved in their lives and now in the lives of their families and his grandchildren. I'm proud to call Jim a good friend. I have never known a more loyal person in my life to his family, his friends, his community, his Irish heritage, and to the causes in which he believes. He is most deserving and the very best choice for this year's Claddagh Award. Thank you.
I'm delighted to be up here tonight, and I'm glad that I went right after Bob because I'm going to be repeating some of the things he said, so I don't want to be repeating them after four people gets up here. But Jim Wellehan, as the 2015 recipient of the very prestigious Claddagh Award given by the Irish Heritage Centre, is so deserving, and I'm so proud to be here tonight to celebrate with him. I'd need all night if I were to talk about the many contributions Jim has made to our community. So I picked out 3 of the things that I think has impacted my life and my friends' lives in Lewiston. First, the respect he has earned in the LA community as a businessman and a leader. Second, the difference he has made as an environmentalist in the state of Maine. And third, his long reach in our community that makes it a better place to live from person to person. Jim is a generous and respectful employer. All of his workers are paid a livable wage, with the lowest earning about $12 to $19 an hour, and that does not include bonuses, or commissions, nor does it include management. It does include commissions. Sorry, I thought you were very, very rich. Jim hasn't taken a raise in 23 years himself, is that right? Say yes or no. Because he wants his company to have a more equitable ratio of the highest to the lowest paid worker, which he says is 3.5 to 1 now. In July 2014, Jim was the focus of a short video that called for an increase in minimum wage. The film was produced by a nonprofit organization Organizing for Action, which was organized to lend momentum to President Obama's 2012 campaign ideas. He got social media attention from the president. He was being tweeted about, and from the president. And so I thought that was pretty cool. Jim Wellehan is known statewide for his advocacy for the environment. His company cut carbon, and again, this was said on the video, carbon emissions by 40% since 2004, with better insulation, improved lighting systems and skylights, and moved to a clean diesel in his delivery trucks. This kind of environmentalism benefits all of us, and Jim admits that they have saved money along the way. It's good economics, it's good environmental stewardship, and it's good for business, Jim says. Kathy, Mrs. Wellehan, co-owner of the company, and Dan as well, I take it, has been instrumental in their success as well. In 1994, she led the effort to reduce 95% of the company's solid waste and was successful in that. And finally, when Lamey-Wellehan stopped using plastic bags, they did not pocket the profit. They applied savings to their high school scholarship program. 41% of children in Lewiston live in poverty, but they don't go without shoes. Jim Wellehan does not blame the poor or the homeless for all of the state's trouble. No, he folds up his sleeves and goes to work. Jim began a program through Lamey-Wellehan collecting shoes for people who are homeless or people who can't afford proper shoes. Jim contributes to all kinds of athletics in LA. I've competed in races with him, and I've won some of his certificates to go to his house, to go to his store. I'm a younger senior than he is, so I've won. I beat him several times. This is a quote from Jim while being interviewed by Maine Biz in March. And I also credit Maine Biz with a lot of the numbers that I have here today, including the wrong one. I love my community. I love being proud of my community. It means to be there to be helpful, to try to be part of what makes it better. After all, he says, if the community's better, won't business benefit? Jim, you are a credit to our heritage and to the people of Maine as well. Thank you.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to be here to speak about my brother-in-law for a few minutes. I'm Tom Delahanty, and I say that he's my brother-in-law just kind of as a little caveat, so that I do have probably a conflict of interest here in some ways. I know that you're all here for the opportunity to offer Jim for a variety of accomplishments and his spirit for life. I'm here to talk about him as the Jim that I've known for more than 60 years, not quite as long as Bob Clifford, but at least for a while. Now, our parents, Jim's parents and my parents, were social friends, and we both spent quite a bit of time at Pine Point during the summers. Jim was older than I, he still is, so we didn't spend much time hanging around together then, but when I was about 7 or 8, I had the freedom to roam around Pine Point. Times were different then. I know I was probably a nuisance to him, but it was fascinating to watch he and his brother Dan work on their lightning sailboat, the Jim Dandy. And quite frankly, I think they spent most of the time patching leaks. Perhaps the first vivid memory I have of Jim is one of the times that he was walking down King Street on his hands. Yes, upside down. Not just a handstand, but literally walking down the street on his hands. Now, that was a time when there were probably 3 or 4 cars an hour that went by there, but this is what he would do frequently. Now, to prepare for tonight, I spoke with a number of people who've known Jim for a while, and I learned that when he was young, he was given the nickname Windy. But I was not able to find out whether it had something to do with the fact that he was always talking or some bodily function. Now, Jim is and has been a very successful businessman, which no doubt comes from years of experience at a variety of tasks. Now, Judge Clifford has already told you a little bit about Botch Brothers, but the two of them had this company at Pine Point, and the business grew. It actually did, and I think at one point they had painted almost every cottage on the point, and that's probably why they all looked about the same color. But at one point, and I think basically because I was kind of hanging around making myself a nuisance, they employed me. They hired me as part of the company. But they didn't trust me with a paintbrush. So what they did is they gave me a bucket of rags, a can of turpentine, and just told me to sit there and clean up the messes. So when one of them would yell botch, and most often it was Jim, I would have to run around with the rags and the turpentine and clean up, so that way they didn't have to come down off the ladders. So that was my first real job, and I appreciate the fact that Jim and Bob as well took me in on that. Now, I remember Jim as the coach of an undefeated championship baseball team for Pack 115 of the Androscoggin County Cub Scout League in 1957. The team had a number of excellent Cubs, the Faheys, the Leahys, the Murphys, a Delahanty, and some kindred souls of Irish descent, but we were sponsored by the United Baptist Church. Later, Jim took on the persona of a George Steinbrenner as the owner and general manager of the Lamey-Wellehan Loafers of the Auburn Recreation Department Duffers Softball League, and we were Duffers. So that was some of his experiences, and we went on from there. Now, fast forward a few years. After high school, after Holy Cross, after Africa, after the Army, after Wharton, Jim was living in an apartment on Main Street in Lewiston with a friend of his, Ed Wilson. Jim was dating a girl from Lewiston, Auburn, and I was seeing a friend of hers. We were invited to a cookout at Jim's apartment around Labor Day. We had a great time. A few days later, I headed back to college. I came home at the 1st of October for the fall break and learned at that time that Jim was seeing somebody else, but in that short period of time had also become engaged and set the wedding date as December 31st, probably to get the tax deduction. In that short time, Jim had found Kathy, and you heard about that on the video. He decided it was time to start dating one of the customers, and the rest is history. The point of this is that when Jim decides to do something, he does it. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, 49 years later, it looks like it was a pretty good decision. Later on, a few years later, I found out that right after they were married, Jim started working on Kathy's younger sister, Ruth, and wanted to introduce her to me. Ruth didn't like the idea and wanted nothing to do with it. Jim never said a word to me, but the following year, Ruth and I met independently of Jim's efforts, and the rest is history. Again, Jim knew what he was doing. In 1997, Ruth and I were taking a cruise, and Ruth was talking to Kathy, and Kathy said something like, well, do you mind if we come along with you? And Ruth said, well, yeah, okay, but Jim can't talk politics with Tom. So that was the one condition. But on that cruise, I made Jim famous. On about the second night after dinner on the ship, Ruth and I were walking around, and there was something going on in one of the auditoriums on the ship, so we went in. And they had just starting up the Newlywed Game. You all remember this from television. And because we hadn't been seated as we walked in, they got us, and we ended up on stage, as the participants. So they asked a few preliminary questions, and then they had the women go out. And the men were on the stage, and they asked a bunch of questions. But the final question was, which one of your wife's relatives would you least like to be stranded with on a deserted island? Now, this could be very sensitive. I had to think real quick. And so I said Jim. And so Jim and Kath walked by while the wives were standing out in the hallway. And they said, well, what's going on? So Ruth says, oh, we got this game and so forth. So they came in, and they sat down. And then the wives came back, and they're asking the questions back and forth. And when it came Ruth's turn to answer the question, she got it right. So they said, well, who's Jim? I said, he's my brother-in-law. He's on the cruise with us. And so Jim... they said, where is he? Jim stands up in the audience going like this. They got the biggest round of applause of anybody. So for the rest of the week, we're on the ship. No matter where Jim went, people are going, hey, there's Jim. Hi, Jim. How are you? Nobody recognized me, but he was the hero and the most famous person on the ship. Now, why is Jim getting this Claddagh award thing? The most I can figure out is that the Lamey-Wellehan chain was founded and opened its doors for business on St. Patrick's Day, 1914. Or maybe it's because the store honors that day by giving out live shamrocks to all the customers, just a little gesture to foster goodwill among the patrons and the customers. In addition to talking to some friends, I did what everybody does today to find out about somebody. You Google them. So I put in James F.X. Wellehan. I came up with 13,100 hits in 0.6 seconds. But it didn't do me any good because 90% of the responses were for James F.X. Wellehan Jr. And they were references to son Jims with all kinds of sites to scientific research and reports with names and descriptions of animal conditions that I cannot pronounce, and papers that he's written at the University of Florida. Jimmy chose another field and has been highly successful, as Jim has been with Lamey-Wellehan. Jim is a unique spirit. He is always enthusiastic. You know that whenever and wherever you see him, he will start up a conversation. I've heard somebody tell me he could probably start up a conversation with a pine tree. Now, usually the conversations are about politics or religion. And even if you try to ignore him, he finds a way to push your buttons and inevitably draws you into the conversation. When Jim takes on a cause and makes a decision, he does so with passion and commitment. And I remember at a time at a family gathering a number of years ago, probably a cookout with burgers and all the stuff, Jim said, I'm going to be a vegetarian. I did question his commitment at that time and wondered if Lamey-Wellehan would stop selling leather shoes. A couple months ago, Jim proudly announced his support for Bernie Sanders, not surprisingly, as he frequently supports candidates out of the mainstream. Now, Jim has received a number of well-deserved rewards over the years for solid and innovative business practices, and you've heard a lot about them tonight. They all work well. You don't see many other businesses like his across this land of large chains and big box stores. Jim has always been involved in the community and has always had his hand out to help others. 13 years ago, Ruth and I became homeless when we were building a house in Falmouth, and our house in Lewiston we put on the market sold after 12 days. Jim and Kath took us in. That was a unique experience. But it was inevitable in the morning while I was having a cup of coffee, Jim would say, you know that coffee's not good for you. And I was thinking, Jim, what is it going to do, stunt my growth? But That didn't stop him from having a six-pack of Oakhurst coffee milk every day. And Ruth and I, while we were there, we were trying to downsize, so we decided to have a garage sale. And we were doing it out of Jim and Kath's garage, and they decided to put some things in there as well. Jim gave away most of it as people were coming, so that cut down on the sales that I was trying to make. But he did strike up a conversation with about everybody who came to the garage sale. And I remember there was one young lady who came, and Jim and this girl were talking for quite a while, and it turned out that she was having trouble finding a job for the summer to help with her school expenses. And Jim told her to come to the store on Monday morning. That's the type of guy that Jim is. He's willing to help anybody at any time. Now, Jim now describes himself as a left-wing, socialistic, environmentalist, peacenik radical. That's a direct quote from a March article about Jim that said he was creating a legacy of advocacy and fairness. He wasn't always on the political left, and it's taken him a while to get over there, because there was a time when he was to the right, but he still had the same passion and the same commitment to everything that is good. We're lucky to have Jim on our side, and we're lucky to have him as part of our family. Thank you.
So this is the first time I've been asked to speak at the Irish Heritage Center for an event that doesn't have to do with the hurling club. And as I saw a lot of familiar faces here, I think there was some confusion as to why I would be speaking. And now I think as we've been connecting all the dots, everyone realizes just about all of Lewiston's Irish are essentially related. Now, growing up in Lewiston on St. Patrick's Day, we didn't have the parade that we have here in Portland and a lot of the other great activities like those they put on here at the Irish Heritage Center. But the one thing I do remember looking forward to each year as a kid was when my grandmother would take me down to the Lamey-Wellehan store on Lisbon Street for their St. Patrick's Day celebration. The store would be decorated, had food and balloons, and like they did on the first day back in 1914, they'd hand out potted shamrocks to the guests. These links to the business's Irish roots weren't only apparent on St. Patrick's Day. As you look through various parts of the business, the company's green logo has often been accompanied by shamrocks, and at one point, the Auburn Mall store even featured green, white, and orange carpeting, not so subtly reminiscent of the Irish tricolor. Outside of work on some evenings, Jim and Kathy can even be found Irish ceilidh dancing at Edward Little High School. And I know several of us here in the Portland area hope that we see them down at Rira soon for the ceilidh dances hosted by the Burns sisters. But Jim's never been shy about showing his Irish pride, individually or through the business. And in fact, as we all know, Jim's never been shy about sharing anything. Recently, you may have noticed that Jim seems to have become more vocal in sharing many of his beliefs through local forums, editorial columns, and across the media locally. Always a leader on the environment, Lamey-Wellehan's move to eliminate plastic bags from its stores, along with Jim's encouragement, helped pave the way for Portland and South Portland to impose bag fees, and the town of York, as recently as last week, to outright ban them. Perhaps Jim himself was inspired by the Irish who imposed these bag fees some 13 years ago. Beyond just environmental issues, though, in this past year, we've all seen Jim speak out on a host of topics, including income inequality, CEO compensation, raising the federal minimum wage, campaign finance reform, and immigration, just to name a few. Undoubtedly, Jim received advice from others around him who told him that maybe he should remain a little more low-key and not rock the boat, out of fear that the business could face backlash from those who may be opposed to these ideas coming from, as we heard, a self-described left-wing, socialistic, environmentalist, peacenik radical. Well, naturally, Jim didn't remain silent, and it seems some have clearly taken notice. And I'm not just referring to that shout-out on social media from President Obama this summer, but that was pretty cool. While Jim's well-documented environmental efforts, community involvement, and business success, not surprisingly, have led to some awards in the past, in 2007, the Sierra Club named him Business Leader of the Year, and in 2011, the Auburn Business Association named him Citizen of the Year. Something seems to have happened in these last 12 months. In what was essentially already a year to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Lamey-Wellehan, as Jim spoke up for these issues he felt so strongly about, it was as if Jim had blown up. In the past 12 months, he received the Natural Resources Council of Maine Lifetime Achievement Award, along with Kathy, the Institute for Family-Owned Business Family Business Award, the Maine Children's Association Giraffe Award, the Maine Association of Nonprofits Catalyst Award, the Maine Women's Fund Visionary Partner Award, and Maine Biz's 2015 Business Leader of the Year. Earlier at Pine Point, when I first heard he had won the 2015 Claddagh Award, I congratulated him this summer at Pine Point, and I had just generically said, "Congratulations on the award." And that's when Jim said, "Which one?" I thought maybe he was confused by two, and that's when he rattled off this list to me. I'm pretty certain I may have forgotten a few in there. But this widespread recognition is well-deserved, as Jim proves that things like treating employees well and caring about the environment and the community you serve are not radical thoughts, but good business, and also hold up to the friendship, love, and loyalty symbolized by the Claddagh. I expect this award that he receives tonight will sit atop of all these others that I mentioned earlier in Jim's now overflowing trophy case. With that, could we have Jim come on up?
Thank you. Now you notice that there were 4 excellent speakers there, but they were chosen carefully. My brother Dan and his family are right here. We want to hear a word from them. Now, when I was a kid, Dan and I were in church together, and it was around Easter time, and the priest said, as he gave the gospel, said, "Whoever shall call his brother Raka, thou fool, shall be guilty of hell's fire." And immediately my brother said, "Raka, Raka, Raka." And you know, it was the worst you could do. I called him Raka, so he is, and always has been, he's Raka number 1. I am Raka number 2. So these things happen, and you know, you heard some good things. We've had some wonderful people from Lamey-Wellehan who are here with us, and I'm very appreciative. Are they in 2 tables or 1 table? Is there another table? Okay. Oh, 1 table over here. A very good-looking group, I might add. And I'm very appreciative of them, and they're all friends. But the truth is, they know the truth, and so we didn't want them to speak either. So, you know, because if you want things out, you want things to go the right way. You know, my old buddy from grammar school and high school and from running in the Bates track event is here, Johnny O'Malley. And he knows me too well, so we kept him seating too. So that I did, by the way, have the wonderful opportunity to speak at King Middle School, where Jane and Mary both teach, Dan's daughters. And it was just the most wonderful thing to go there and meet the kids, a bunch of immigrant kids coming from all over the world, just as eager to learn, just as eager to help, just as eager to be good citizens here in Portland, Maine. Portland is blessed with this new immigrant community, and Lewiston is very much blessed the same way. By the way, I left out 2 other people here. There are 2 other Lamey-Wellehan people who've been here, Ed Lecter and Bob Cody, and they were with us, 25, 30 years ago. They're great people. I appreciate them being here. So thank you. But But, as we go along, they all told you there's so much to be done. I had hoped early on, as much as I appreciate Tom and Mike and Bob and Margaret speaking, I'd really hoped that to have a couple of other people you would have enjoyed. They couldn't be here. One was Bernie, the other was Pope Francis. And they do send their regrets. They asked me to carry on their message. Among other things, I think we do need to raise the minimum wage, because I remember talking to a lady up in Augusta. She was from Portland. She was from Burundi, and her husband had been killed, and she fled to this country after his murder with her three daughters who were all in college at the time. She was working in healthcare at a minimum wage job, trying to do everything she could for them. And I just think if we've got, what does hospital CEOs make? 500,000. No, more, much more. 2.5 million. There you go. So when you have that sort of discrepancy, it's not right. I mean, when you were a kid, if your mom said, Tom, you didn't clean your room. Your brother did a great job. His room is clean. He's been studying hard. He's done his homework well. He's on a roll. He's playing on the sports team and so forth. I just made some brownies, and we're going to give him 2, and when you finish getting the room clean, we'll give you 1. Well, it might tick you off, but you could accept that. But if she said, Tom, we're giving your brother 354 brownies, and you 1, which is the current top-to-bottom pay ratio in CEO salaries, you would say, gee, that's not right, Mom. That's not fair. And it isn't fair. And somehow or other we've forgotten to raise these issues as we grow and work in other places. And I think we need to raise the minimum wage, because $7.50 wasn't going to make it for this lady. Her daughters are all in college. 2 were graduating this past year. A lovely lady. Great story. It's a heroic story. But we need a minimum wage raise, and we need a maximum wage put in. And maximum wage should vary with the size of the company. Maybe it's 20 times, maybe it's 30 times. In the 50s, it was 20 times. And I remember the 50s. I'm sorry, most of you don't, but those are good times. And I think these are things we need to do. And I think if we want a better country that's fair for everybody, we need to make sure that they are paid a living wage so they can bring up their children. We need to be able to have enough to raise taxes to educate children. We need people able to buy shoes rather than get them free, sorry. But we just things we need to do to make a better society. And my wife's telling me I've been talking long enough. By the way, just as a side, I am going to retire this year. I'm only 77, but I'm going to retire after Christmas, and I'm going to spend a lot more time. Here I am, got a very young, beautiful trophy wife. And I'm going to spend more time with her. Now, about the award, you're wondering how come this, everybody makes mistakes. I don't want you to worry about this sort of thing. You'll probably do better next year. But I am the 8th awardee of the Claddagh Award. And if you want to think about being 8th, think about being the manager of a baseball team. Okay, who might have up to bat first, second? Oh, who's going to bat 8th? Well, there is a difference. And if you're wondering how this whole thing happened, actually, it was Bob and Tom that were talking, and they were down here, and Mary was in the next room, and she heard them talking, and they're talking, boy, if there's anybody who should get the Chatter Award, it's Jim. They kept on talking about this Chatter Award. And she heard it, and she said, And she didn't understand, she misunderstood. She thought they're talking about the Claddagh Award. So he said, "We'll call her right now," she said. So she called me, and here where I am, and you guys got to suffer through it, and what are you going to do, you know? So that's the whole story, and it's much appreciated. We all have a lot to do. We've got to make this a better world. We can do it if you believe in it. We've got to cut our carbon emissions. We've got to create a fairer world, a kinder world. We've got to improve. We've got education. 51% of the kids in American public schools go to school, and they live in food insecurity and poverty. And that's no mark of a great society. And we can't call ourselves a great society if this is what we do. And the Defense Department, it has never been audited. And if we're going to have a government that's responsible, we need to audit the Defense Department. Now, on a personal basis, I'd cut the budget in half, then I'd start to look for waste. But thank God we have a wonderful senator who makes sure that as much money as we can get spent in defense industries, and we're lucky that way. So thank you all. You've put up with a whole lot, and I wish you better luck next year.
I'm going to cut in for 1 second because Uncle Jim said Brother Rocca didn't get to say anything. And Uncle Jim, I worked trying to sell Uncle Jim shoes for 15 years. Toughest sale in the shoe business. I remember him telling me more often than not that my grandfather told him and told my dad, stick to your last. Uncle Jim was a heck of a shoe guy. He understood his business, his customers, his community, and he stuck to his lasts. That's an old shoe term. And I think we forget how hard the shoe business in Maine was. It was taken over by outlets. You survived. He really was the first locavore around here. His people. I've bought shoes. Every time I say my name, I say I'm Jim Wellehan. They laugh. I'm like, where else would I buy shoes? That's where my friends buy shoes. We're lucky to have one independent retailer that thrived because of his intellect, his compassion, and his shoe knowledge. Uncle Jim, your whole family couldn't be any prouder of you. You stuck to your last, my friend.
Hi, guys. Now, I want you to know that this is one of the best Irish dances going in northern New England. And if you're clap hard, we'll give it a go. All set?
Now, we usually close the evening with a song, and Jim has requested a special song, and our friend Peter Manning's going to come up here and sing. Would you like to have the last word before Peter sings us out of here?
It's a great song, and you've had a wonderful meal, and been a busy week, and we've had some great speakers. Then we had a dull one who would put you to sleep, and then we had the little award ceremony. So we want to be sure you have a good night's sleep. So Peter's going to help you with it. Where's Peter? Come on over here, Peter. I'll join you.
Well, I just have to say that your brother and I sang in the choir for many years at Sacred Heart, and he had a great voice.
It's true.
A lot
He
better
still-
than mine.
He still does.
He does.
You want to get him up here, Peter?
Yes. Danny, come up.
How you doing?
And he lived in my neighborhood for many years.
Gracious. You know the sign, yeah? Over in Claddagh many years ago.
There it is, right there.
Nothing else to say.
Well, Peter was the champion of the Sacred Heart Choir.
Oh, it's no doubt.
Rita
There's no doubt.
Martin and Sylvia Infantine for about 20 years
Yeah, about 20 years.
after Charlie Nakin retired.
Yeah, yeah. Are you ready?
We're all ready, Peter.
Over in Killarney, many years ago, me mother sang a song to me in tones so sweet and low. Just a simple little ditty in her good old Irish way. And I'd give the world if she could sing that song to me this day. Oh, Tora-Lora, Tora-Lora-Lorelei, Tora-Lora-Lora, hush, now don't you cry. Tora-Lora-Lora, Tora-Lorelei, Tora-Lora-Lora, that's an Irish lullaby.
Go home and sleep. Now go home and sleep well.